Once, in a village where the river bent twice before it reached the sea, there lived a woman whose husband had been gone 3 winters, and whose house sat closest to the water of any house in the village. She kept one thing that no one else did. Every night, without fail, she set a candle in the window that faced the road, and let it burn until dawn. It had not always been so. It began on a night of black rain, the kind that turns a road into a second river, when someone knocked at her door. She did not open it. She heard the knock, and a voice asking for shelter, and she stood very still in the dark with her hand flat against the wood, and she thought of the stories the village told that season of men who came to lone houses in storms and were not what they seemed. So she waited. And the knocking stopped. And in the morning the road was washed clean, and there was no footprint, no mark, no way to know who had stood there, or where they had gone, or whether they had gone anywhere at all. She never learned the answer. That was the thing she carried, not guilt exactly, though it wore guilt's shape some nights. A question with no bottom to it. So she began the candle. Not as an apology, since there was no one left to apologize to. More as a kind of answer she could give the road, every night, in case the question ever came walking down it again. Years went by the way a river goes by, slow to the eye, fast underneath. The candle cost her. Oil was not free, and a widow's oil is counted twice as closely as anyone else's. The village noticed, the way villages notice everything and explain none of it kindly. They called her house the lit house, and said it the way you'd say a house was haunted, or unlucky, or simply strange. A man once came asking for her hand, a quiet, decent man from 2 villages upriver. His mother came with him the second time, looked at the window, and asked why a respectable widow kept a candle burning all night like she was signaling to someone. "I am," the widow said, and offered no more than that. The mother did not come a 3rd time. Neither did the son. The widow's own boy, grown now and living on the far side of the village, asked her once why she wouldn't just let the old habit go. It cost her comfort. It cost her, some said, a second marriage, a second life. The storm is long over, he told her. She said the storm was not the thing she was lighting the candle for. He did not understand that. She was not certain she fully did either. But some promises are made to a question rather than a person, and those are the hardest kind to set down, because the question never comes back to release you from it. Then, one autumn, decades after that first black rain, the sky over the river turned the same color it had turned that night. The wind came up the same way, and the widow, old now, her hands slower at the shutters than they used to be, felt the years fold together as she lit the candle and set it in the glass. The knock came near midnight. Her whole body remembered before her mind did. Her hand went flat against the door the way it had gone flat against it 30 years before, and for a long moment she simply stood there, an old woman and an old fear, face to face with the same wood. But her hand found the latch instead of the frame, and she opened the door. A young man stood there soaked through, a peddler's pack on his back, more startled by the door opening than she was by his knocking. She brought him in, sat him by the fire, gave him what bread there was. He talked, as travelers do once they're warm, about the roads he walked, the villages he'd passed, the trade he carried. And then, almost as an aside, he said that he always watched for a lit window when a storm caught him on the road. Always had, since he was a boy. He couldn't fully say why. Only that once, very young, lost in weather far worse than tonight's, a lit window had meant the difference between finding his way and not finding it. He didn't remember whose window. Only the light. The widow said nothing for a while. She only watched the fire, and did not ask him the question sitting in her chest, because she understood, finally, that it did not need an answer anymore. The light had done its work somewhere, for someone, whether or not it was ever the one house, the one road, the one night she thought it owed a debt to. In the morning the young man went on his way, thanking her, already looking down the road toward the next village. The widow lit the candle again that evening, as she always had. But something in her had loosened, the way a knot loosens once you stop pulling against it. She was no longer lighting it to answer an old question. She was lighting it because somewhere, on some road, it was still doing what it had always done. And that is why, to this day, in the village where the river bends twice before the sea, one window is always lit, not for who it once failed to save, but for whoever it might still find.